Weekly newsletters.
Robin, can you hear us?
I don't.
Need that
Yes.
anymore.
Perfect.
Now I can.
We muted because we were chit chatting, but now that the meeting's about to start, figured to probably unmute, sure our audio is good.
Excellent.
Now we have to
Everybody.
be careful what we say.
Ready?
We can be ready.
Okay. Well, let's start the May 7th, 2025 Village Planning Commission meeting. And I'll turn it over to Craig.
Thank you, Chair. So tonight we have, first item is a design review consideration. And so I'm going to read the hearings disclosure statement, and then we'll have Robin give the staff presentation. We do have representatives from the project here this evening, both on the design side and the business side, if there are, the things you want to add or questions that you may have for them. But we'll just get going. So this is a quasi-judicial land use hearing with the City of Wood Village Planning Commission. The Planning Commission decision in this matter is based on the applicable criteria as set out in the State Planning Goals, City Comprehensive Plan, and Wood Village Zoning and Development Code. Tonight's hearing will be conducted this evening as follows: a presentation of the staff report on the proposed application by staff, presentation and/or comments by the applicant, any testimony, questions from the public, those in support, neutral, and opposition, applicant's rebuttal of testimony if they wish, final comments by city staff if necessary, close of the public hearing, and discussion and deliberation by the Planning Commission. They may either make a decision to approve with or without conditions, deny, or continue the hearing. If you wish to testify this evening, please come forward during the testimony portion and state your name, address for the record. All testimony must be directed to the applicable criteria. No additional comments or questions will be accepted after the public hearing is closed unless the Planning Commission decides to reopen the hearing. If you are submitting any written materials into the record, please state the nature of its contents and provide a copy to the city. The Planning Commission may at its discretion entertain additional questions or testimony prior to the close of the hearing. At the conclusion of the public hearing, the commission may approve the application with conditions, deny the application, or continue the public hearing to a future date. If the commission continues the hearing, they will set a date for the continuation of the hearing. The decision on this application will be developed into a final order, which will be available 7 days after the hearing. A decision of the Planning Commission may be appealed to the City Council by an affected party within 14 days of the notice of decision is mailed. Only the applicant or parties who provided testimony on the record may appeal the decision. We can now go to the staff report and presentation.
Thanks, Greg. Let me. Share my screen. Folks see that presentation?
It's a little small.
Okay, let me swap this out for another option.
We're not up yet either.
Does that work better?
Mine just came up. Yeah, there's a button.
Just 1 second, Robin, we had a technical difficulty with our dais screens.
Okay.
Should I hit it again?
Blue.
Nice to meet you. Darn.
Darn.
No, they're the new people we haven't met. Last time was just you and I.
She's the council president.
Nope, they are not coming up.
They went away again.
No, sir.
I can just crane my neck.
So, not, I'm gonna. Are none of them working?
Uh-uh.
None of them working. They say no signal.
Okay,
I can share with her. I can move away.
We have TV screens up that way before. We did. Maybe not.
They're doing something.
see it though.
Sorry, Robin, we're still trying to figure out
No,
our
no,
tech
it's
glitch.
okay. It's okay.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, but it's.
Thank you. Oh, and there's that person who's talking. I can look at Scott's.
There it
There we go.
goes.
There you go.
Okay, now let's go get them all.
Oh,
Wow.
don't hit the table.
Sensitive. Okay, don't touch it.
Are we, okay, I think we're good to go.
Great. Okay, great. Is this viewable? You can see the city logo and the
Yep.
File
first
number.
screen. Okay, awesome. Great. Okay. Hi, I'll introduce myself. Hi, I'm Robin Shaletsky. I'm a planner in Portland, and I am working with the city to help them process land use applications. So this is DR 2501, a staff report for a type 2 design review. I have about 8 or 9 slides, and then you can ask questions if you like, but just to keep us on track. As Greg mentioned, the public hearing process is as follows. I won't read these since he just read them. This is DR 2501. It's
Yep.
its address is 25585 Northeast Sandy Boulevard. You can see on this map, location map and zoning map, it's located in the commercial industrial mixed use district, right up here with the red dot, north of, west of 84. The proposals for a new vehicle inspection cleaning facility and some minor site improvements at the Carvana facility's 27-acre site. The reason for the review is a type 2 design review is required for all new buildings within this zone, the commercial industrial mixed use zone. The site includes lands that are just outside of the city of Wood Village and Fairview. Fairview's corner is up here. I don't know if you can see my cursor or not. The site does not contain any resource areas, floodplain, or environmental constraints. It's in close proximity to the Troutdale Airport and adjacent to the Union Pacific Railroad, which runs along this north side. Again, the proposal, it's to develop a 10,000 square foot vehicle inspection cleaning facility, some security fencing and accessory structures here. It's located in 2 separate portions of the site. They will remove 150 parking stalls in order to construct their building. There are no changes to the uses on the site or auto access from Northeast Sandy Boulevard at the south of the site. All utilities exist on the property. Just to run through the zoning code criteria that we were evaluating this project against. The applicable Wood Village zoning code provisions include section 250, the base zone requirements of the commercial industrial mixed use zone. Section 500, the land use review procedures, directing us to a type 2 land use review, design review. And then section 630, the criteria regarding a design review itself. So in summary, all applicable use and development standards of this zone continue to be met with this proposal. There are minor changes to the internal site circulation and auto parking, as noted, the removal of parking spaces and some of the ways that folks are going to maneuver around the site. There was a mailed notice provided and limited comments were received from the Port of Portland and Multnomah County. Should have those in your packet if you have any questions on those. There are 6 design review criteria. So alongside your screen, you can see the proposed color palette for the project, and like some neutral tones, befitting the industrial nature of the use. So the first criteria is in regard to the relation of the design review project to the environment, and staff finds that this has been met with the proposed low-scale buildings on the site, and then the industrial palette, color palette as noted. Safety and privacy is one of the other criteria, and this again has been met. The applicant is proposing some internal fencing, and the site itself the location of the accessory, these structures on site provide substantial site setbacks, providing safety and privacy to both the applicant and then the surrounding land uses. The other noted criteria here are in regards to needs of disabled persons, and these will be met via review and via under the city's building code, state's building code. The number 4, the preservation of the natural landscape. This has been met as the project building will be constructed over an existing paved area. There's no loss of existing landscaping. The 5th criteria in regards to pedestrian and vehicular circulation and parking. This has also been met. The applicant noted that there would be not many visitors to this portion of the site, so folks who are staff will be familiar with how to get around on the site, and that's been met. The last but not least, any concerns in regards to surface drainage, and there are no proposed changes to that stormwater. This would not trigger any changes to the current stormwater provisions on site per Multnomah County's comments. I've noted some of the elevations here, looking north, facing Sandy, and then also looking west. Last of the criteria, again, are in regards to buffering and screening. Again, we've talked a little bit about this. On the previous slide, you notice that existing landscaping is still maintained on the site, and there's substantial setbacks. The utilities, the site is currently served by all utilities and off of Northeast Sandy, and no changes are proposed. Of note is that this may require additional approval, Department of Environmental Quality. Those will still be a requirement for the applicant to obtain any other outside approvals as part of the building permit process. Design criteria regarding signs and graphics continues to be met. There'll be no changes to signage that are visible from the street, and the city sign code does not apply. Last but not least, plan and code compliance. There are no changes to access, no impacts to local or regional transportation systems, and these continue to be met by the proposal. Staff's recommendation is to approve of the Exhibit A, which is the site plan and associated documents that wastewater provider, wastewater review agent condition that design review approval shall expire in 2 years. If would is a quick run through of a pretty straightforward project. I'm happy to take questions from the Planning Commission. If they have any. That was this first part. I can now happy to turn things over to the applicant if there are no questions from the Planning Commission.
I have a question. Do we have any concerns about and one of the things was about the height of the cranes that they would be using?
That's if cranes are needed for construction. There's a process to go through the Port of Portland for the flight area. I imagine the applicant would probably have a better understanding if cranes are needed, but since it's a prefab metal structure, it's probably doubtful cranes of any height would be needed. But that's why that condition's in there, because it is in the flight pattern. So if cranes of a certain height are needed, there's some conditions for that.
Oh, okay. So it's a metal structure, not a cement?
Correct.
Oh, okay. I thought I read cement.
Questions? Okay, we can hear from the applicant.
if the applicant has anything to add or talk about, you're welcome to come up and state your name and what you want to talk about.
Nothing to add.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we will close the public hearing.
Well, you have to open it for public comment.
Oh, public comments? Okay, now we'll close. Now we'll close that and we'll open up for discussion. Anybody?
The
No
packet
concerns.
seems very thorough. I appreciate the note about pending approvals for wastewater. That would certainly be an issue with a car wash. But I mean, all the other criteria are met and the submission was thorough.
Comments?
Comments?
No
Good.
comments.
Scott?
No questions, thank you.
Okay. Okay, then I suppose we.
It'd be a motion to approve with the recommended conditions of approval.
To approve with the conditions.
I motion.
Counselor Tan, you actually can't make the motion or
Oh,
vote on it.
It's gonna go on yep.
Yeah,
Also move.
being jumping on it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Hang on a second. Counselor Chan can't make the motion, so
I can't initiate the motion.
Yeah, you can't make the motion. Yeah.
I so move.
We have a motion.
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
All right. Congratulations. We'll put
Yeah.
together the final decision. We'll get it mailed out to you and we can go from there.
Yeah.
We're excited too.
Yeah. Just for our photo dome. Online.
Yes, if my,
Oh, sorry.
no, please.
Actually, I have a question. When you were talking about photos and I was looking at the design of so that circular thing is where you guys would take the photos of the
Yeah.
vehicles. Okay.
I figured that.
Because if I understand everything correctly,
Figured out.
Odessa Carvana is moving away from the in-person auction to essentially all
Online.
remote and virtual. And this helps facilitate both the photos of it, but also some additional reconditioning for those customers. So it's not retail customers, it's the wholesale people bringing their stuff in. So it actually should generate less traffic, especially on Thursdays, which were auction days.
Do you foresee adding this structure adds possibly more job opportunities? I mean, I don't know if you're expanding or just restructuring the facility.
Yes, in general, this is, so. So. Minimal impacts, but,
Possibly.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I can go.
Yeah, thank you.
There's more here. to do.
So Robin, if you want to stop share, I will share my screen for the next items.
Awesome.
So we're going to talk about climate-friendly equitable communities, otherwise known as CFEC. It's probably been a very long time, or the first time for some of you hearing about this, but we're at that point in the timeline where we need to make some decisions. We talked to the council about this in November, specifically for the parking regulation. So we're going to walk through a bit of a background, either as a refresher or some new information, what the specific regulation is called for in the state mandates, and what that means for us and what we want to do about it. So this goes all the way back to 2007, when the Oregon adopted the Climate Action Plan, which was to reduce carbon emissions. Great, wonderful goal and objective. In 2020, the state convened a work group to see how that's going, and it didn't go well. Weren't meeting targets, emissions weren't where they should have been, and so they developed a work group to basically redevelop state land use laws and regulations to help eliminate and reduce carbon emissions. We can argue all day about who was on that panel, who wasn't on that panel. There was one rep from the entire metro area, even though it affected the entire state. Needless to say, it was approved, adopted, cleared legal hurdles, and 89 rules were adopted. And they were mostly upheld by the Court of Appeal. So we are where we are with it, but that's just a quick background of these regulations. Specifically for Wood Village for this evening, we're talking about parking because there are two parts to CFAC parking. There was called Parking A, which essentially prohibited parking within either certain development types or within transit corridors. And then there was Parking B that essentially covers all other areas. Now, for most cities that are larger than a square mile, they're both very relevant and applicable. When you're 1 square mile and you can't have parking minimums within a half mile of a transit corridor, it gets very interesting very quickly. And the state did something unique in that it said frequent transit isn't defined as like that rapid transit, every 10 or 15-minute service. It was whichever is the most frequent in your community. And so Halsey runs about every 30-ish minutes on a good day, but that's our most frequent. So we worked with DLCD to say, okay, if Route 77 or Line 77 is our most frequent, what does that do for parking restrictions? And that whole blue area here basically is where we cannot mandate any parking for any development, whether it's single family residential, condo, apartment, Carvana. It doesn't matter. We cannot mandate parking. That doesn't mean parking can't be built, but simply it says we can't mandate it. So for example, our multifamily rate is currently 1.5 spaces per unit. We did build in options for along our neighborhood commercial door to reduce that, but it doesn't matter anymore. A developer doesn't have to build it under the state law. Now, it's also interesting, this can morph and change over time because we know there's trying to get more service on 223rd. We've got a new line on Gleason. So essentially, we can't mandate parking in the entire city is basically the gist of it. So then there's Parking B. Now, this does a few things. One, it has additional components for outside Parking A areas, but it also has standards for if you build any parking. And so essentially any parking lots over ½ acre, you have to have a tree canopy, solar panels, also some EV conduit. Not going to go into a lot of those details, but you can see there's generally a gist of things that developers have to do if building a new parking lot. And I did get clarification from DLCD, Department of Land Conservation Development, who's administering and overseeing all this. It's for new parking lots. So if you have an existing parking lot, you can keep it. You can, either add storefronts or, just keep it as is. So it doesn't impact current, but new. For Wood Village, there's not a lot of raw dirt left, but that doesn't mean there may not be impacts as there's redevelopment. So Parking A took effect actually about a year ago, and we didn't do anything because we didn't like it. Parking B, we actually received a deadline for June 30th, 2025. We're not going to make that deadline either. The intent was something came up with fire service, pulled up a lot of staff time. But in November, we talked to council about this. They said, yeah, we probably should comply, but don't fast track it. You can wait. Well, we've kind of waited. We're kind of there. We should probably focus on this. So you can see for Parking B compliance, you can either repeal all parking mandates. Generally, you're then going to be an approval other than adding the components that needed if you were to build a parking facility. Otherwise, you can kind of mix and match and bundle these different options. But because we're under Parking A, it doesn't really make sense to do mix and match and bundling when essentially state says we need to repeal all parking mandates.
My property's in A.
So what are our options? And we presented some of these to council. But, it's one of them is do nothing. Just leave it as is. That does a couple of unique things. One, we would be found out of compliance and we could risk our state shared revenues. We could risk state funded grants because we're not in compliance with state law. Developers could also, choose to put in a development application under the state law and say, I'm putting in X and I'm not having parking or what your code says. And if we don't approve it, they could sue us. And not only could they sue us to allow basically a court order to allow it, they can get their attorney fees for it. So That doesn't feel good for the taxpayer value. We thought we'd get a little smart and creative, basically like, fine, we'll adopt your standard state, even though you've never been to our city. But we'll retain our code and say, yes, we'll acknowledge this code exists, but by golly, our community values this. And we'd probably found in compliance technically, but it would be very, very confusing. The LCD may still kick it and say, no, that doesn't count because you're allowing something different. And whether it's a developer, a property owner, or staff, trying to answer a simple question of how many parking spaces do I need for this development? Well, it could be 0, or it could be this number, or somewhere in between. That doesn't feel good either. So we're left with adopt the required state standards, which again, doesn't necessarily feel good because we understand our environment where, yes, we're a suburban area. Yes, we're quasi-urban suburban. And yes, we agree with the state's goals of reducing carbon emissions, having other means to get to places that you need to go work or school or groceries. It's hard to do when the infrastructure doesn't exist. When you can't take a bus to work, it's hard to say, well, then you got to find another place to park your car. And over time, as things redevelop, there probably will be fewer and fewer spaces, which will lead to more and more complaints and concerns, and we will send those to the state. So the staff recommendation to be in full compliance, not risk litigation, is to adopt the state standards. That staff would bring back a code for your consideration that would be in compliance. Probably the latter part of July time, would go to council, most likely then in September. So we'll miss the deadline, but I don't think the state will have too much heartburn over a handful of months, knowing that we're working towards compliance. But I'm going to pause there, see what questions and concerns you have and what can answer.
I think you have to comply.
If we did nothing, what's the state shared revenue? We might lose gas tax.
Yeah.
All of it, all the state shared revenue. So gas tax, like
Alcohol.
the cigarette tax, alcohol tax,
How do they justify taking away anything other than road related?
because we're not in compliance with state law and standards. They would probably threaten it for a few years before they actually did it, but they can actually withhold state shared revenues and any state funding grants.
If a citizen complained, we take it to the state. What's the response time? What's the
So-
response time on the state's?
So here's a hypothetical.
Mhm,
Let's just say a house right over here redevelops into a little fourplex, because it can,
mhm.
under the middle housing law. And to maximize the land space, they don't put any parking in, which
Yeah.
they don't have to.
Mhm.
Those 4 units, let's just say it's 8 cars. 8 cars lining the street, maybe some come, maybe some go. So neighbors start complaining, hey, there's a lot of cars. I'm like, yep. And the state said, we have to allow that. Here's the contact at the state to put your complaint because we can't change our law. And so the
Oh.
state would most likely then say, well, if you've got a concern that they're not moving, that's a city code enforcement issue or it's a city issue. But we really want the state to feel the impacts of their decisions in communities in which they've never visited.
Mhm.
So
they-
it's not that a complainant will get a resolution or a community member may get a resolution, but it's trying to tell the story of the state that your decisions in communities that you don't understand have real impacts to those communities, not just staff wise, but the people who live there.
Would keep and adopt, not just from the standpoint of, being political about it because we disagree, but because we can continue to point to what works or what has worked, or so that, somebody building that fourplex, for instance, might know that they.
So there are a couple, I think, bookends or guardrails, if you were, that even though the state says we can't mandate it, that there may still be some parking. So one, depending on how the project's financed, some lenders actually mandate some amount of on-site parking. A good example is the affordable housing project in Troutdale being built right by the police station. Even though they could have built it with 0 spaces, they were going to put, I think, 0.75 spaces per unit or 0.5. They negotiated with the city to actually do, I think it's like 1.25 spaces per unit. So even though we can't mandate it, that doesn't mean we can't discuss options, alternatives, considerations.
And do the options and alternatives have to be available to them in the code in order to discuss them? Or can we just?
No,
pick it
they
up
can
as we
just,
go?
essentially, since we can't mandate it, we can't have a code for it. We can essentially, I think, probably memorialize our current code and say, hey, this is what worked in the past. This is what we used to have, and like refer to it, but we couldn't point to it as like an official policy document. It would just be our prior code.
And that's something we would bring to the table for whoever.
In the, so it also gets a little tricky. So in the case of middle housing, so my example with, someone putting in a fourplex, that doesn't have to go to planning commission or design review.
Yeah.
Again, state law. So eventually they can come to staff and say, here's my site plan, my building permits. If it meets all the criteria, it's either yes or no. Great, we'll put in for building permit. And there's not really any wiggle for discussion on parking. Now, an apartment complex, for example, because that does have more process, planning commission, design review, there can be at least discussion of parking. And most likely because the higher valued projects like an apartment, they're typically being financed, there may be conditions or covenants requiring some amount of on-site parking versus someone may self-finance a middle housing project, or a homeowner may add, I want to add another housing unit, but I'm not going to extend my driveway or add a unit. So I think we'll probably see a little bit of both. Over the next few years, probably again starting a little on the smaller scale before we see a larger apartment complex with no parking. But you can certainly point to some of the more recent projects in our area. They still had parking as part of it. Maybe not as much as we'd preferred or optimal, but we haven't seen, at least in the 3 cities, a zero parking project. There have been a few in Gresham, mostly closer to its downtown core, where you do have some access to light rail,
Yeah.
other transit. Not that there hasn't been some impacts from it, but a little more, a different built environment than the 3 cities.
Anybody expressed any more interest in the property across the street or in redeveloping Madera Court?
I was gonna, give a little update after all the other action items, but essentially there has been no development interests at all. At all on kind of some little housing projects here and there, little add-ons or things, but in terms of a larger scale or medium scale multifamily or commercial, it's not even phone calls.
I'm sorry, Scott, what area was that? Oh,
Oh, the vacant parcel across, this kind of across the street,
Oh,
but over.
right over here, okay.
Yeah. Because there had been a development plan on it. It didn't finance.
One potential buyer that didn't come through was also talking about buying the Madera Court.
Yeah, and that long ago,
Redeveloping it.
between, I think,
Yep.
interest rates, construction costs, some
Right.
economic uncertainties, it's been pretty slow on the development side.
Yeah. Understandable. Be a few more years.
So you really have to move forward with it because you're not gonna, we don't want to lose any funding for a parking spot.
Happen right away.
No, but it's going to.
If we don't do anything, and then again, developers could still come in and say, I'm building this in compliance with state law, that shall allow it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the state was very crafty in how they developed this code.
Sure.
But it seems to me like livability, when you're putting a unit on the market, livability still takes into consideration whether somebody who wants to live there is going to have at least 3/4 of a car to put on there in a parking spot. So
And that's usually where lender requirements come from, because they understand like, well, if it's going to be leased at a certain rate, it needs to be attractive. And, certainly core, urban Portland or these larger metro, yeah, there's probably it makes a lot of sense. You don't need that many spaces. And certainly we could look in our own community. There are some well overbuilt parking lots, not going to deny that. But a one size fits none solution just kind of irks you.
I agree.
So move forward to developing a code to be in compliance, which will be essentially remove all mandates.
If we've had issues at Town Center before when businesses have come in, and we basically had to ask because we had a parking code, we've had to ask other businesses if they'd be willing to let their spaces be used. I think IHOP was.
So that was the IHOP
The last
example because they couldn't self-park on that individual parcel. So they would have technically needed to do a shared parking agreement
Oh,
with
God, I
the
remember that.
overall owner. That overall owner wanted a lot of money for that. So we actually granted a variance to the parking in that situation and then updated the code to reduce parking.
So if we didn't have a code anymore, could IHOP have built without that owner saying, you got to pay for that parking?
Correct, because there would be no minimums. So if you had 2 spaces or 20 spaces or 100 spaces,
But it could lead, it could,
could lead to a
I
parking
don't know if it would
enforcement issue.
incentivize or induce development at town center for the remaining undeveloped parts, but if they didn't have to battle with parking, it may.
So on that note, because the town center master plan does have essentially master planned out more buildings on the undeveloped parking locations, as we found out, as is the case with the town center, a lot of covenants and tenants and deed restrictions on the parcels, one of which is Kohl's has guaranteed parking maximums. And so they can't
So
develop.
State law preempts our home rule, but it doesn't exempt deed restrictions.
Doesn't preempt deed restrictions. So if Sire wanted to build a parcel on there, it still couldn't because the site's deed restricted.
So how much of the parking lot does Kohl's have?
I think that big chunk in front of it, kind of all the
All the
way,
way up to IHOP,
not quite IHOP.
about halfway?
I could pull up a map later, but generally, if you, we were standing in front of Kohl's from the drive aisle, kind of, you got the Starbucks and the Gentle Dental. From that drive aisle, I think kind of to, is it Teresa's
Teresa's,
or the eyeglasses place, I think is next to
Yeah,
Kohl's.
eyeglasses is next to it.
Take that whole swath and go all the way back to the drive aisle by the rock. I think all of that is designated for Kohl's.
Wow.
I like that their handicap's not in front of the door you have to go into. That cracks me up.
I mean, again, that was designed 25, 6 years ago. Shopping was different, designed for your Black Friday events where that lot did fill up
Yeah.
20 some odd years ago. Same with Walmart, but as we've seen, you don't need parking lots of that size. And I think a lot of what CFEC's trying to do is also target that because some jurisdictions don't allow for redevelopment of it. We do. The site has other private deed restrictions, encumbrances that we're not party to. So even though we allow it, it would take some effort to redo that.
Your retro deed restrictions, I mean, are there other places where we could break the law because we added restrictions to the deed?
Say that differently.
So state law doesn't preempt a deed restriction. So is there other places where we might want to add restrictions, see if the owner wants to add restrictions to the property deed in order to not have to obey the state law?
Because it doesn't go towards existing parking lots anyway, I don't think that's a necessary tool. And it could ultimately, let's just say, for example, the vacant lot across the way, they say, hey, we're going to deed restrict this so thou shalt have X number of spaces per whatever development is. Not knowing when that develop, things could change over the course of time, and that may actually hinder positive development of the site. But I like to believe that reasonableness meets reasonableness. But I do know we will have some parking challenges over the course of several years as things redevelop.
Yeah, that's just the thing is that if you request an adequate amount of parking, you're not being unreasonable. But we can't meet that reasonableness with reasonableness now.
But to say, like, okay, I'm gonna rent this new house that was built. Oh, there's not my own parking spot. I'm gonna look at this house over here that has its own driveway. I mean, I think we'll get some market factors, at least short term, that may at least have some monochrome of on-site parking. So that 8-car example, maybe it's 4 cars.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So we'll go to the next one. Okay, reshare. So this goes back to a meeting a year ago. And it was talking about just the design review process, what goes into it, and could there be options and alternatives where some projects may not have to go through a process in which we just went through this evening.
Yeah.
So again, just went through a type 2, and that goes essentially to all projects in the city. The exception are essentially the middle housing like we talked about. If it has, the pitched roof, the porch, the windows, it's a yes or no. It's a check the box. If it has it, it's approved. That's the only exception. Otherwise, new buildings, alterations have to go through design review, and it must meet the conditions in the underlying zone. So in the previous case, the commercial industrial zone, which are relatively, there's still conditions there, but they're kind of more broad versus like the town center, commercial industrial, or the neighborhood commercial. They can be very specific in a lot of them. And so whether you're doing a new build or, hey, I just want to swap out this window for a wall or wall for a window, you'd have to go back through and do all the findings of fact and how this meets all those conditions. So it's the condition of the zone and in section 630. And you need that full report outlining that change meets all the standards. Often results in a couple of pre-app meetings to understand what's in the zone. In the case of the one this evening, because these owners were different than the owners of the last project 10 years ago. They're like, well, what is our landscape percentage? What is, some of those questions? So we sent them the previous application. And so it can be a lot of work, both for the applicant as well as staff, Robin, for what can be some minor projects. An example used last April time was the Fred Meyer remodel. They wanted to take a roll-up door on the side of the building by the garden center, turn it into a storefront door for their new grocery, not delivery, but pickup area. I'm like, it seems awfully goofy to do a big report, thousands of dollars to swap out one door for a different door on a building that probably has 40,000 square feet of frontage. And you're talking about 200 square feet of change. You all agreed with that, but said, yeah, we should probably actually kind of formalize something. Well, here we are a year later, and we put something together. Thanks for the help of Robin and our attorney. So the hard part was this: if we were to put in options that don't need to go through design review, it's clear and objective criteria. So there can't be any staff discretion, no subjectivity. It's not like, well, we like this type of stone or this type of color. It's like middle housing. Does it meet this, and this? You're good to go. So, and these are just, we propose these for your discussion, consideration, but basically what we have is could be classified as an alteration, but that does not alter more than 24% of the total area of the facade. Why 24%? Because it was less than 25. We thought, well, 25, that's a quarter. I've got some examples on the next slide of what that means for some actual buildings, so you can get a sense of how big or little that is. Changes don't reduce compliance with the underlying design standards. So again, you still have to meet the standards of the code. You're not like, well, I'm just going to take out all the windows. Well, no, that's not allowed. You can't change the building elements. You can change building elements not visible from the right of way. Again, have some examples for that, especially like in our manufacturing industrial zones. Essentially, the Carvana was a new build that could be different. You're not going to see that from Sandy. And then we have other industrial areas that maybe they need some loading doors. You're probably never going to see them. Doesn't change the existing roof line because we love our pitched roofs here. And we added also, because we get from time to time, places want to redo kind of parking lot, whether it's preferred spaces for veterans, shoppers, more disability, electronic charging, or they want to maybe create like a plaza, change. I've got too much parking. I want to create some green space. That wouldn't, as long as it doesn't alter the driveways or add parking, that wouldn't have to go through design review. So a couple of examples. Why I use T-Mobile? Because they turned in a sign permit a little bit ago, so I knew their actual store frontage. So they're about 15 feet tall this way and about 25 feet tall that way. So this area is the T-Mobile zone. 375 square feet, so 24% is 90 square feet could be altered without design review under this proposal. 90 square feet means, well, they could maybe remove this section of window, or if this was a wall, add a section of window. It's not a lot. Conversely, let's look at Kohl's. Kohl's is big. They also did some sign permits, so I had their frontage. So they're about 30 feet tall by 440 feet wide. So that's 13,000 square feet of square footage, or about 3,100 square feet could be altered under 24%. So as much as this seems a little small, that seems a little big. So in addition to a percentage, you could also put a maximum of blank square footage to just kind of make sure it's bookended, that all of a sudden you're not just getting some larger changes because it's a larger building. Now, here's an example of an industrial area. So this is 244th here. Railroad tracks are here just for reference. So Halsey would be right towards the bottom here. So industrial area, probably drove by it, didn't know exists except for the chair. So this is what you see from,
Where yours are at.
he's
Yeah.
right there. So this is what you see from the street. So you see this frontage right here. So if this
There isn't.
So if this building here says, ooh, we need more roll-up doors, or gosh, we need to get rid of these roll-up doors for our production, no one's gonna see it. And so does it make sense to have to go through design review for changes no one's gonna see? So going back to this is what we proposed for your consideration. Again, not necessarily science behind 24, it just was less than a quarter. But as you can see, you may still even want to bookend that a little bit, but right now this is just your time to discuss it, see how this resonates, and what you'd like to see in bracket an actual proposed code for your consideration. So I'm going to pause here and see what questions you have.
I think it's a good idea. Pass through, pretty simple, like you said, a little door here, a door there, some window.
And that's generally what we see.
Yeah.
It's doors and windows.
Doors and windows and-
Maybe an awning.
Yeah.
The more
a pretty
streamlined
simple-
process.
Yeah, a pretty simple process.
Yeah. I'm not tearing the whole facade off and redoing stuff or anything, just that,
Yeah, you're tweaking existing basic.
I would just say, kind of make sure that they put a roll-up door, blends with the colors and all the rest, not put a purple door on a beige building type of thing. You know what I'm saying? Just, so it kind of matches what's there somewhat when you can see it.
Well, and that's where you still have to be in compliance with underlying typical design standards. So there is a standard of, blending with the existing built environment, natural environment. And so again, we don't want to get too discretionary or subjective, but like you said, well, we want to do this bright purple door right on Halsey. It's like, great, you can take that to design review.
Right.
Because
There you
it's
go.
like, that's still a choice for an applicant, in a question of maybe they don't like staff's response, great. Let's put together a package. Let's let you all make that appropriate determination.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah,
That would.
yeah. Then they don't have to do it. We can be
So
the bad
what are the
guys.
thoughts on just the percentage of alteration? Do you,
Staff have a suggestion on the not to exceed side of the equation?
Where did we come up with that number? Was that illegal?
no,
Oh,
no, it was just
okay.
less than a quarter. We were talking 25%. I'm like, well, that is a straight quarter. Let's do 1% less than a
Okay.
quarter.
And then, so I'm going back to Kohl's, that's 24%.
So yeah, they could do almost 3,200 square feet of alterations. I'm like, that does seem too much, but is 1,000 when you're looking at, it's 30 by 440. So 1,000 square feet. I'm trying to think of an object. So a garage door is typically like 16 feet by 7 feet. So that's, I want to say somewhere north of 100 square feet.
What if what they want to change isn't a door? What if it's a sign?
So sign permits actually don't go through at all, because even when you do a design review package, it's permits to be submitted, because that follows a very strict code of you get X percentage of a sign allotment based on your frontage. And because signs, you can't necessarily regulate content for First Amendment, colors and yada, yada aren't necessarily as applicable as other elements.
Yeah, we went through that a couple of years ago, getting that all set up. I remember that.
Mhm.
The entire sign code.
And that, it seems to be working well. From a staff level, the sign code works well. I think we're getting appropriate size signs for appropriate size buildings, but certainly if there are obviously comments, we can
I
take
haven't seen
those.
anything out there. Just sometimes too many flags at the town center. Drives me nuts. Just, I don't know why construction, that's.
But-
That does not change the existing roof line. Should that be an and none of this?
I'm gonna
None of
let
the
Robin
above.
explain the or. She added that and had a very specific reason for it, and I don't want to mess it up. Robin, did you hear the question? Oh,
I did. Let me think about what my brilliance was behind that.
because I think we're trying to think, as long as it has to kind of meet
Just like-
each one of these.
Yes, because if you say and, then it has to do all of them.
Yes.
If you say
Well,
or, then you have the option of just having one bullet point.
Or the
apply.
other. Yeah.
It's kind of which one's applicable, I think is
Right.
the thought. So
So you could rewrite the beginning and say, you're exempt from design review if you meet one or more of the following,
Mhm.
if you choose to.
yeah, you'd still have to like meet it. So you couldn't, well, I'm going to add a window, but then I'm going to also alter the roof line. Well, now you're not meeting it.
Yes.
So the window may still work, but your roof line wouldn't.
I suppose my read was, my building does not change the existing roof line and therefore I meet the criteria from.
For kind of
exemption.
anything. Oh, I see. So like, I'm not changing the roof line, so I can do whatever I want.
That's kind of how I read it, but I'm not an expert in this area, so that's just my question.
I think it probably needs a little bit of an intro paragraph.
Is it, this
probably
isn't
needs like
necessarily
a-
the final code language.
Yeah,
These are
it
the,
probably
Absolutely.
needs a few sentences, it probably needs a few sentences to just set it up. If that helps.
yeah, the intent is, yeah, it basically has to follow this. The phraseology we'd want to make sure is, makes sense to the reader, but is also legally defensible that no, just because you're not changing your roof line doesn't mean you can get rid of all your windows and put in a purple roll-up door.
Certainly.
Oh, I made the purple roll-up door. Well, I wonder why.
Thanks, great.
So I don't think we resolved the 24%. It sounds like the percent is probably fine, but do you want to try like 1,000 square feet as a maximum?
Yeah.
So how much of the Coles building would change if they had 1,000 square feet? How much of the frontage? Like that whole, between the two doors, is that
Yeah, I'm
1,000
trying to
square feet?
think, if this is 30, then you go 10 feet's probably somewhere right about here. Then you can go 100. No, yeah, 10 by 10, times we go another 100.
Because T-Mobile was 690 square feet? Is that correct?
Hmm?
T-Mobile 690?
Well, T-Mobile only had 375
Oh,
square footage of frontage, so they could alter 90 square feet. So a couple of windows is essentially all they could do.
Okay.
But when you get the larger storefronts, a large percent on a small building is a small number.
Right.
A large percent on a large building is a large number.
So would it, on the Coles picture, the two doors, like that, the brick in the center there where Coles is, the word Coles is that about 1,000?
Probably, because I'm going to guess if you were to carve out both kind of these storefront entries, that's probably close to 1,000 combined. They're probably 400 and change. So add them up, that's probably about 1,000.
Quite a bit.
You want to do 500? Because that 500 would be about
One door.
one door area.
Yeah, I think I would reduce that to about
Yeah.
just a.
Yeah.
Again, we can change it over time. It's not,
Yeah.
Yeah, and
See how many come in at.
Yeah.
this
Well,
is
yeah.
seeing the number of
Uh,
things for the design review process.
because we get so many.
Covered. Right.
Well, it's,
I forget how.
But like for a
Worst case scenario, they
project,
just come. to
worst
the-
case scenario, they can come like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
okay, it's,
We want two to,
we want 502 feet.
Right.
Like, well, change your math. But there will inevitably, however we craft, these, there will be some that falls out of it. It goes to design review. It's always an iterative process.
I think the larger buildings, we really, we maybe have to set like, say, a maximum of 500. Because that just could be the whole frontage practically, you get that. And
But it would solve like the Fred Meyer thing. No, that would have fit just fine and
Yeah, 'cause the
everyone could
roll-up
feel
door,
good
that's like,
about
what,
it.
8 feet.
But again, some small business owners or property owners having to go through a process because they want to add
It's too much
a
money.
thing. It seems like a lot of work for everybody.
And it might be prohibitive for some of those small businesses.
Mhm. To go through the process to hire the people, actually put together the application.
Right. But the larger ones, when they're going to do a mass.
Most larger ones, I mean, they've got all their plans, they've got all their
They
people.
just go, okay, we're doing plan 2 today, so, it's already done.
Okay, well, certainly happy to take a run at this. The plan will be to give you the code for consideration at the same time we're bringing back the parking one. So hopefully latter part of July time,
Okay.
we'll be here and
Great.
consider it. Both will have to go to council and they'll consider it, and then we'll keep on moving on. So just a few other general updates, which aren't many, is not much is going on development wise. So we don't have anything. There's nothing in like a pre-app. There's really not a lot of chatter. We did meet the Grand Ron last week and they're doing an economic, if you read in the weekly, they're doing an updated report.
Speaking of weekly,
The what?
the weekly little newsletter, the letters you send out,
Uh-huh.
I haven't had them in months.
I send them to you. I make sure of it.
I haven't got it in months.
So your Comcast email? Send an email specifically to you, see if you get it, and then we'll know maybe it's just going to
Not, I'll go
spam.
to use my other one then. Comcast is shutting stuff down.
Yeah, Comcast is closed, especially if you don't use them frequently.
But I use that one.
I got an
See, I didn't get my,
saying that, dropping mine.
the annual financial thing we have to sign out because we're on the committee. They called me last week. I never got it. Wasn't in my junk or nothing. But I was
That's weird because
sitting,
that goes to your Comcast email, so.
I have one for my Wood Village business and then my personal.
Hmm.
So if it doesn't come through.
We'll connect.
They're gonna throw you in jail.
No, they called and, no, they said that something went wrong on their end because
Hmm.
there were 2 or 3 people calling hundreds that week.
Oh,
And they just did it over the phone.
oh,
And it was,
that's nice.
you're in compliance, you're done.
Yeah, let's connect on the email thing. But yeah, so we met with the Grand Ron. They're updating an economic feasibility report for the site. Should be done fall time. Then they're going to take time to evaluate it, options, considerations, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't expect anything there for, try to say a few years. That's just realistically, even if they had the plan in fall, in early next year, they got, this is what we're going to build. We all know it takes time to put together the plans and yada, yada. So nothing new there, nothing at the site across the street. The Walmart remodel though, I think it's celebrating tomorrow. Friday. They're doing a little grand reopening. You probably didn't notice much change on the exterior because they didn't do much on the exterior. Some new signs. I think they patched up some paint work. Fred Meyer remodel, I'm sure you're all aware, is well underway. Don't know when that'll be done yet. And Chick-fil-A, they're building, they've got the dirt torn up. You see our restroom should be done near the end of the month.
One of the conditions of Fred Meyer being able to build the fueling station was the electric charging stations.
Mhm.
And one's been knocked over and never replaced, and the other 3 don't have cords on them
They
anymore.
haven't worked here.
We've sent them a notice about that.
Okay,
After it was brought to our attention, like, hey, your charging stations aren't working.
can we start to find them?
We'd have to give more notice opportunities for correction before we start finding. But short answer is yes, longer answer is there's a process. And we're following that
I just wasn't
process.
sure where we were at in the process.
Now, Walmart, I think, has actually added more electronic charging stations than they've had. So I think that was a project over the summer. Now, the city was part of a grant pool to get some charging stations here. It was federally funded, and so that's gone away.
Yeah.
What about the waste transfer system, waste transfer site funds?
Oh, those ones. So that is through a grant now being managed by East County Rising. I believe grant applications were due, I think, last week. City didn't put anything in this year. We did last year and got monies towards our wetland park. But I know Play East Rec had put in a grant for it. But opportunity for future years, I think the grants max out at 20 and charging stations cost a lot more than 20. It's the charging stations themselves, but the infrastructure needed to actually electrify them can get very expensive. So any other questions, wonderment, city development, city projects? Community gardens finished? And
I gotta complain, I guess. I don't know if it's a complaint or what, but we have a lot of red light runners lately, and I've almost been hit about 5 times in the last 2 weeks.
is it the Gleason or the 238th at Halsey?
I'll tell you the really bad one about 2 weeks ago.
Uh-huh.
I was making a left-hand turn from Hogan to Gleason.
Mm-hmm.
3 cars. Ran a red light. Mine was green, ready to go. I don't take off anymore because I've almost been killed in 2 accidents. Sitting right there in front of the station at Safeway. First car, a sheriff, and just let them all go. I go, are you kidding me? Would he have just sat there if someone got hit and killed? And then the next one is bad as it's Stark where the car wash is.
Oh, yeah. There, so
That's
on,
bad. Those 2 are bad.
so there is actually a countywide safety action plan focused on 181st, 223rd, 238th, and 242nd, or 257th, looking at both speed cameras and red light cameras, because we know enforcement is limited. In general, it's limited. Unfortunate,
I mean,
that was just sitting there. We have done some missions, especially we've done them on 238th because of the high crash corridor. 223rd and Gleason is actually the highest crash corridor kind of in our, draw like a 3-mile bubble. And then speed stuff on the freeway. So the sheriff's office able to do.
Are on that Stark and Hogan and 238th and whatever that 4 corners is.
So we work with the sheriff's office trying to do special missions when their staffing allows. They've had, like a lot of public safety agencies, staffing shortages, but they're hoping that by this summer, they're, I'll say fully staffed, better staffed.
Better staff. That's
And can do some more regular missions
yeah,
again.
it's rough. I've almost gotten killed twice in my life, but someone red lights when I had a green light. And right now, the way it's been, I don't leave on a green light if I'm the first car.
The other, again, not judging it, they were getting some federal funds for a lot of those traffic missions. That's just kind of up in the air of how those may funnel through in the future.
It should be nice. They'll do something when someone gets killed, and that's the sad part.
But yeah, definitely now that the state allows more open use of speed cameras and red light cameras, there's been a lot of interest.
Great red light cameras.
Mhm.
Was there any traffic info? Chick-fil-A went in.
So that's the,
That whole.
how do I phrase this? The unscientific, the downside is using science sometimes because it all goes by the ITE manual, the International Traffic Engineers Manual on Traffic. And so most studies are very outdated, don't take into account niche or specialty. Restaurants like a Chick-fil-A or an In-N-Out, for example, that really have this unusual draw to a restaurant of that size. And so by law, they only had to follow the ITE manual. So with that project, it fit the parameters of the traffic design for the town center. So Chick-fil-A itself didn't have to do any traffic mitigation. That said, we also took your concerns to the county that basically said, this roadway is not optimal already, let alone
The lines.
a
are not
Chick-fil-A and what that may do, especially when it first opens. I think over time it has a pretty good queue. But those 2 driveways, Park and the one close to Gleason, are a disaster now. So we've been working with the county for about 3 years to restripe that.
Yeah.
We were told,
You guys even met out there
yeah, I know.
a year ago, year and a half ago? And I haven't done anything.
I'm not gonna
Basically, it needs restriping to, so people know what to do.
So I'm not going to say we talked about getting some black paint and doing it ourselves.
I'll do it. No, I don't.
Condition may have occurred. We've been told now the county plans this summer to grind out those, they're developing a plan to kind of redo from Gleason to Park,
Mhm.
that whole configuration.
Yeah.
And they plan to actually do it this summer. Chick-fil-A, we're talking maybe September when it opens. So hopefully that aligns.
Mhm.
We're also pushing the county on Park Lane itself, that needs to be a 4-way.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
The traffic, again, the imperfect part of science. Traffic engineers would say that doesn't warrant a four-way. The pure
didn't.
logistics of, you know, the curvature, the topography probably dictates, and the accident history dictates a four-way.
The fact that people pull up to the stop signs believing it's a four-way.
So
Oh, yeah.
we're working with the county on that, again, trying to,
Not so much a signal, but at least a four-way.
they say it's better to wait till Chick-fil-A's in to update the study. And I'm like, just do it now because it's a problem now, and don't wait till someone's killed or seriously injured or more accidents to warrant the
Well,
four-way.
another thing too, even since I've been here since what, 2014, I guess. And even in the last 2 or 3 years, the old city, 200 units in there?
Mhm.
Then up on,
Oh, yeah.
then the other ones up across from Safeway,
Mhm.
another 200 units.
Plus all the
Not-
ones in Fairview.
Not to mention the warehouses,
Mhm,
Subaru and Granger.
mhm.
That all creates a bunch of traffic.
So they're gonna wait until Chick-fil-A's running and then do another.
That's what their preference would be. We keep pushing just to do it now.
And the traffic pattern.
Well, and the thought was, especially the driveway by Gleason, that should be a right in, right out only, which would then, if you want to take a left out of, call it the Lowe's, Chick-fil-A, Sola side, you would have to go to that intersection. It'd be a four-way. It's a little more controlled and
Yes.
manageable than trying
Yes.
this. No, I know. But I mean, you can concrete your islands a little. You would, in this case, in my preference on parking, I'm not a traffic engineer, you would actually concrete median, Wood Village Boulevard to essentially prohibit it, which didn't exist at the Tree Hill one. You kind of did, I think they call it a dog leg, but there's nothing preventing the actual movement onto 238th versus I think we would put in, like you see now in Gresham off of 242nd, the little concrete.
So you can't make
Curbing.
left-hand turns.
I mean, you can, but you better have a,
But coming out of where the Chase is there. if you come
yeah,
out-
you'd have to go over the curb.
Right, so now you go all the way through the 100 million treacherous speed bumps to go to onto that. And then,
Yep.
it's just like going in the car wash. My husband's like, oh, you can't go that way anymore.
Yeah.
So, I mean, some sort of physical barrier, but we'll see what the county comes up with. They're going to do a design first. We'll evaluate it. Yeah, we know that stretch is a hazard.
Yeah, it's really
That
bad.
right-hand turn lane, I mean, they don't even necessarily have to restripe it if you just put up the flexible yellow plastic bollards that prevent people from going into the lane and then continuing straight.
What's frustrating is, the maintenance people, they get it. They understand, yeah, this has been a problem for a long time. And I'm not dissing the other side of, the
No.
office side of it.
Red tape you have to go through.
Unnecessary red tape.
Exactly.
And it's frustrating.
Probably, yeah, just like when they don't have money to pay road,
Design.
here I go again,
They have
to
do it.
do the road work or nothing in the budget. Then why, when you have some project out on your street, you got 6 guys and 3 of them are standing with their hands in their pocket, when you only need 3 out there? Sorry. You want to cut money? Move them to another project, get more done.
So, because I have other questions.
Oh, one more question. The 1,000 acres or whatever, what's going on?
In terms of the unhoused population. So just had a meeting on that today. So it's a joint effort between Multnomah County through the Hope Team, which is Sheriff's Office, Joint Office or Department of Homeland Services. And it's going to be Department of State Land, so DSL, because part of it's state land. A little more east you go, it's actually federal land. So this is on the state land part of it. And I can't tell you where that line is. I've seen it on a map, but I have no point of reference. There is an effort underway to essentially, I think they've started essentially a concerted effort, again, it's like the 4th one in 2 years, to do outreach at that specific area to those who call that home. Basically saying, I believe it's June 1, or I'll just say early June, that they'll actually have teams come in to physically remove all the stuff. It'll include both a team to preserve what could be personal, information, personal, belongings of value, and a team to remove essentially everything else. And so they're being connected with either supportive resources or at least navigators now. in advance of that early June timeline, that call it a cleanup, if you were. When we had a meeting, so it's going to be the Salvation Army is the kind of key point agency doing the outreach. They connected with the Hope team. They've walked it several times, kind of mapped out the known community members. And I want to say, I'm trying to think of the number. It's going to be wrong, so don't hold me to it, but I think it was around 30 or so people calling that home. Obviously, I think in the summer months, you get a lot more transient people. You know, maybe it's just they're there in the summer months, but they call somewhere else home throughout the winter or wetter months. But at least for the more longer term, more permanent people, it's somewhere around 30 that they're looking to provide services to find an alternative housing situation that's not in Thousand Acres.
Terrible timing with the end of permanent supportive housing.
Yeah, that was brought up. That's why they're trying to do it now, while there's still maybe some resources, but the resources aren't plentiful. That was disappointing when they tried to do the housing multnomah now there. I think it was November of 23. It just failed because they brought in all the wrong people with all the wrong connections, and it just failed. But there was the resource for actual like housing options. Well, now we got better or different people that make, resonate, connect with more, but the fewer options for people. So that's been a concern is one, where are they going to go? And will they start filtering maybe more westerly? And what does that mean and look like? But that's where also that line of what state land versus federal land, it's presumed that those people probably know where that is and will probably just
Sure
move
do.
deeper
They do.
into it.
They do,
And they will
yeah.
move deeper in because, when I was battling Mayor Lauer and some other people about the homeless in Thousand Acres, they had pictures where they had actually gone further into the federally owned land, and there were a significant number of building even like 2-story structures or digging out the land and building structures with basements. And so, I really couldn't refute all of what they were saying, but that number of people that are immediately accessible to the Hope team inside of Thousand Acres hasn't changed. It was about 28
Mhm.
ago when I wrote that editorial after Councilor Caswell went in there and tried to clean up camps. And and that's just you mentioned, you said the county and effort in the same sentence, and I nearly threw up in my mouth a little bit. Because it's imminently solvable, we probably still have about the same number of chronically homeless in our 3 cities, which the Hope team said was, about 250 when the joint office was restructured and got all of their grant dollars.
We met with the Salvation Army and the Hope team. So the Salvation Army is the new dedicated outreach team just to the 3 cities / Thousand Acres. And so they'll be in good partnership with the Hope team, which it seems to be working, very optimistic. They actually kind of had a map of kind of known people and where the general area they call home. Fewer than we've had in the past. But that doesn't mean obviously the summer months, we get a lot of people enjoying our natural environment. But hopefully now with this new team, with the Hope team, we can keep things manageable given the lack of actual housing and shelter options.
It's like the parking we were discussing earlier tonight, the point in time count really doesn't serve us well because the people that are homeless here most of the year are living close to services in the winter when.
Else.
That's all I got.
Oh, my God.
Well, thank you all very much. And thank you, Robin.